Good morning, Mike San.
Oh, camera.
What do you know?
No escaping it.
No
Follow me to
escaping it.
Wales.
All the way from Japan to Wales. Good trip in Japan.
Yeah, exceptionally good.
Yes, and we left you in Japan doing what you do with a few fish there, and it just seems like time melts away, doesn't it? It goes quickly.
It certainly does.
One of the things I noticed, and I took a bit of a picture of, is the TDS's AT pH. I gotta remember now. It's on that meter. pH is 7. Is that right, Ian?
Thereabouts.
TDS at 80.
There's very little pH in the water here.
Speaking about all those figures, then I'll put it edited in. Just really for a lot of new people to the hobby, how important is KH, TDS, pH? Because a lot of people now, there's a resurgence of RO and non-RO, and I think it's a great opportunity to have something fresh recorded on RO, because for me, I've been around a little while now in the koi hobby. You pioneered, in my mind, the whole RO on koi ponds and running a low KH and things like that. So could you just, especially for the new guys to this, there'll be people who already know this, but maybe can you just talk over how you came about it and your feelings on it?
It's a long story, but it all started for me back in 98.
1998, yeah.
And that was where via basically an internet forum,
Right.
a Japanese one, I kind of hooked up with a Japanese guy over there who seemed to know quite a bit about water.
Yeah.
And it was him that basically told me that my water was no good and that the pH was too high, it was too hard. I needed to try and find a way of softening it and so on. And he basically then also sent me a lot of material about water. There were a few people over there, one guy called Ken Sasaki, another guy Miyazaki-san, who were particularly clued up on water. And basically using obviously what he told me and material that he'd sent me from those other guys, it made me obviously see things a whole lot differently about water. I mean, at the time I was of the mindset of, well, you know, water is water, surely, you know. It looks good, so what difference does it make whether it's hard, soft, or what the pH is? And that was always my mindset. But basically, after going down the route of finding a way of softening it and finding obviously RO systems and so on, it really did transform everything for me. Fish that we had as hobbyists for a number of years that had never grown suddenly started growing, everything changed. And then it kind of had a knock-on effect onto a couple of prominent hobbyists as well, whereby they kind of went the same route. And one guy actually bought a Kahaku from me, which at the time, back in 2002 I think it was, they bought a Kahaku from me, a Momotaro one, which was 61 cm, and everyone around the UK was, oh, there's no way he's got a Sanzai at 61 cm, it's just lies, it must be on the side, you know.
All things have changed,
at the time, things have changed. And that fish I sold to the guy, and he had it for exactly a year, and a year later it had grown 1 cm. And he basically expressed his disappointment in the fish. He was saying, you know, it's only done 1 centimetre and so on. And I said, well, that's basically because of your water being the way that it is, as I said before, and that you need to go the RO route and sort it all out. And he said, well, okay then, if that's what you're saying, if you're blaming that, he said, let's find out, let's give it a go. So basically, he went the same route, RO and so on, and everything with that changed. The following year, that fish went from, I think it was 62 through to 74 cm in just 1 year, just as a result of running RO. And basically all of that, him and a couple of other people, it all then kind of had a knock-on effect where people were actually seeing that there was conclusive grounds for warranting the use of RO. And I think, to my mind, it transformed the hobby for a lot of people in the Western world, because I think in the old days, people would buy a fish, and the general mindset was that, okay, if you want fish to get big, your only hope is to leave it in the mud pond, because that's the only place you can grow fish. They used to think that it was just the magic and mystique in the mud pond, and it was always touted that way. But the reality was that it's just basically, it's all down to geology. The Japanese, you know, sort of geological infrastructure is such that all your rainwater permeates down through rock that basically has got no carbonate hardness or calcium hardness in there at all. So it doesn't pick up any minerals when it goes into the ponds. So it's basically running really low TDS water with really low GH and KH levels. And basically, the long and short of it all is after generation and generation of breeding koi over the years in Japan, these fish are basically genetically adapted to that water, that environment.
Right.
You know, it's the same as discus.
Yeah.
You know, yourself, you keep a discus, you've got a pH of, say, 6.6, something like that.
Yeah.
It's what they've become basically adapted to.
Yeah.
If you were breeding discus generation after generation, and you were keeping them in harder water, I dare say that they would actually genetically kind of adapt to being bred and raised in hard water. But these animals aren't.
Yeah.
You know, so long as people wanted to buy them from Japan, they will always be suited to that water.
Yeah.
And in all fairness, if you were to breed fish in the UK, genetically they're still Japanese.
Yeah.
From their genetic makeup, so they'll still be adapted to that water. But I think if you were to breed generation after generation for the next 50 years, then things might change. Then you might have koi in the UK that are genetically adapted to being raised in hard water.
I guess it's the difference between koi thriving and surviving.
That's right, that's exactly it. Just because it's swimming around and it's breathing and it
And
looks
it's
healthy
eating.
doesn't mean it's growing well or doing well or that it's going to last long.
Yeah.
And this is basically where RO over the years is it just has transformed the hobby, I think, because now the mindset is that people now aren't thinking, okay, if I want the fish to get big, I need to buy it and leave it as a breeder. They're now thinking that, okay, if I want fish to grow big and I don't want it to die in the mud pond, I can do it in my own pond.
Yes.
So the mindset's completely shifted. Now, I think most people, when they're buying koi, they want to take them home. They don't want to leave them in Japan anymore.
Yeah.
Unless it's for Japanese koi
Koi
shows.
show, yeah.
I think people just want to take them home, put them in their own pond.
And enjoy
And
them.
I think most prominent hobbyists these days are pretty confident that they can grow fish either as well as a breeder can or better than a breeder can, and without any other risk.
So I think I should back up a little bit because so a lot of the new people know that when you were talking RO, well, you still are now, that you never sold RO equipment.
Never sold it, no.
Because it wasn't something that you were doing to gain money.
No.
It was more basically to try to keep the fish in its optimum condition and growth and all those things.
And it was also a way of trying to, even since the early days, 19, 20 years ago, it was the tail end of 99 that I started doing the koi business. And even since then, the whole focus was on trying to buy fish and sell fish and get those fish to grow and GC. And one really prominent person who kind of more or less created the UK hobby, actually one of his quotes years ago was that no hobbyist in the UK would ever grow a Go Sankey to 80 cm plus in their own pond, and if they did, they were lying. That was kind of a famous quote of the day, as it were. And that kind of hits a nail on the head. Everyone in those days was basically had it in their mind that it couldn't be done.
Yeah.
And with, like I say, the advent of RO all those years ago, people started to realise that it was possible. And now it's become something that a lot of people just think, oh, well, I'm building a koi pond, I want to buy better koi, this is what I need to do, rather than kind of arguing against it. I mean, back in those days, 20 years ago, the whole world thought I'd gone mad. And everyone was saying, oh, don't go and buy a koi from Mike, if you buy it from him and get it in your own pond, it won't be able to cope with it, and it'll die, and so on. There were all sorts of stories going around in those days, but it's quite comical, really, looking back. Because now it's just like one of those household tools that everybody uses.
Yeah, exactly, Well, I mean, for me, I ran RO in my old pond because I needed to. The new pond, I don't. But I've learned the whole way of growing fish in RO and non-RO. The sort of the words that people are using today is if you run a low KH, then scientifically the bacteria wouldn't be able to cultivate on the media and you'd lead to a crash. Now, I know that's wrong not scientifically because I'm daft in that way, but from discus, because I keep discus and I run almost zero KH in my discus tank, and they're filtered through BHM, no other media, just backy house media, because I'm not buying cheap discus media when I've got in my mind the best media in the world sitting there. And literally, I just took it out of the shower and throw it in a sump and just run it that way. And I have magically no ammonia. And discus, by the way, for people who don't know, they're harder to keep than koi. Koi is a walk in the park compared to discus, but they're thriving, they're growing.
Failed.
I've got discus now close to, that magical 7.5 inches, 8 inches across. So for me, that kills that story, but maybe that's not Mike's stomach, by the way. That's the high pressure pump.
And it's still working.
So for me, the whole argument that scientifically, koi, the bacteria needs a certain level of calcium, and koi need calcium in the pond to survive. Do you want to address that?
I've kind of addressed it before, and basically, if the latter were true, then you would find an instance whereby you would put water into a pond and the pH level on that water would fall. Or your calcium and magnesium ion count would fall because the fish were basically absorbing it, and frankly it's just rubbish. The fish are basically, there's so much excess calcium and magnesium within their food. I mean, if you look at the actual chemical breakdown, if you like, of food, the most abundant elements of it really is calcium and magnesium. Now, what you'll find is the fish will use whatever they can utilise from that food, and then the rest basically gets excreted, which is why your pH level, calcium, magnesium ion level in the water will always be massively higher than the water that's going into the pond. It's because basically the fish can't use it, they're wasting it all. As far as I'm concerned, if there were any truth in that whatsoever, fish would be basically keeling over and falling apart in mud ponds, because there is literally zero calcium and magnesium levels in mud ponds, virtually zero pH. I mean, you're talking on a mud pond typically 30-35 ppm TDS. It stands to reason that within that there's virtually no makeup of anything in there. It's literally almost pure H2O and nothing else.
And so is it right in me saying that koi gets its calcium from what it eats rather than absorb it? So that was my feeling as well. So these are some old hat things for you and I, because we've done videos like this before, but